Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Janice today. Janice is an individual from Washington State that reached out to me via email about some interesting things that she has been experiencing over the years out there. So welcome to the show, Janice. How's it going?
Very good. Very good.
You know, I think there's going to be some really interesting things shared in this episode. So I would say, I'm going to go ahead and pass things right over to you. Welcome to take us back to when you first started experiencing these things that were, extremely paranormal. But you're welcome to take it from here.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Janice. I was born in 1944 in Sacramento, California, and I was born as an identical twin in an ordinary middle-class family. My twin and I shared an uncanny telepathy. We had our own language and quirky gestures that some of our friends used to mock in a good way. When we met people we didn't know, we would pick up on information about them, which was later confirmed. My mother always told me about that I was a sleepwalker through my early childhood. So in the early 50s, we were in a house that had a deadbolt on the front door, but it was an old-fashioned type where you had to have a key to lock it or unlock it from the inside as well as the outside. So she told me when I would sleepwalk, and she didn't want me to be wandering around outside in my sleep, so she would hide the key before she went to bed. Well, I was already in bed, but as I got up, she said I could always find the key. So she felt that I had a strange telepathic way to find that key. My first STE, meaning spiritual transformative experience, was in 1964. My husband's spirit actually astral projected from and returned to his body while he was asleep. The reason I knew how long I was awake, because my baby was 3 months old and she had an ear infection. So she woke me up in the middle of the night so I could give her medication, which I recorded. So I knew I had been up 30 or 40 minutes between changing her diaper and nursing her back to sleep. So I sat on the edge of the bed and just trying to relax and get sleepy again. And I looked over at my husband, and his spirit manifested fully, which he always wore a white t-shirt and white boxer shorts to bed. He was a smoker. So I watched his spirit walk in through to the living room, which was aligned with the open doorway of our bedroom, and sit on the couch fully in this dress, and leaned over to the coffee table, picked up a pack of cigarettes, lit them up, and I actually could see smoke surrounding him. After he finished the cigarette, his spirit walked back into the bedroom and was absorbed into his body, just like it was a different layer of himself. And when he woke up in the morning, I told him about it, and his response was, "Coming from you, that doesn't surprise me at all." And to this day, I wish I would have asked him what other things made him say that about me, because I don't remember of any other incidents where he would have thought that. So not a lot happened before that, but my second experience was in 1968. My twin actually died aside when we were 24 years old. 10 months later, I contracted the Hong Kong flu and had a near-death experience and out-of-body experience. I'm going to read you because some of these stories I have written before, and some I actually have audio and written. So I'm going to read this to you from my written script. As I lay in the hospital bed in 1968, the Hong Kong flu ravished my body. This was the third relapse I suffered during the winter months. I wasn't even sure how I had gotten there. My husband had been out of town on a business trip for a week while my temperature soared to 105 degrees for 5 days. Dehydrated, weak, and unable to stand, I scribbled a note to a neighbor and sent my 3-year-old daughter to alert my husband. They notified him and he returned home late that evening. By that time, I felt semi-comatose. Later, I found out the virus had gone into my heart valves and made me have an extreme arrhythmia. The virus caused my heart to accelerate. It was like a buzzsaw in my chest. My husband had returned home later that evening and wrapped me in a blanket and rushed me to the hospital. Nurses and doctors began administering digitalis and oxygen to slow my heart and were racing around the bed saying, "Don't lose her." It's hard to explain how my very being consisted only in my consciousness, my thoughts, and my spirit. I was no longer a body. I was just simply that. I was so depleted, I felt no physical energy, and my spirit exited my body near my solar plexus. Suddenly, I was above and near the ceiling, looking down on myself, my body supine, hands folded across my abdomen. I was overwhelmed and actually excited with this miraculous joy of knowing I didn't even need my eyes to see. How could this be? The answer came to me when a bright light shined in a corner of the room and a voice beckoned me. I thought I was hearing a public announcement, but I noticed no one else in the room heard it. The voice was a strong, deep male voice saying, "You may ascend fully or go back." Reality struck me. I had a 3-year-old little girl to raise and a husband at home. Of course I must go back. Immediately I was whisked back into my physical body. I remember thinking about going home and not even minding to clean any of the houses, especially the toilet, which is so bizarre in such a circumstance. Pondering, I somehow knew why I was given a choice. Having lost my identical twin earlier that year, I had run away from my own body. I did this by staying overly busy. My resistance diminished and vulnerable to illness. A part of me was struggling to find a new balance in my life. I had become a singlet. It was always we and us, but now it was just me and I. I held so much inside, but was then able to let go and mourn with my new reality, knowing there was something greater than myself. After all, I had just met God. My sister, that was older than us, dated a homicide detective in Los Angeles, California for 13 years, and she would help him on his homicide cases. So she had that ability, and my mother also had it, but she didn't know how to use it. So we couldn't really skirt around her in any way because she always knew what was going on. My children, Janie and Adam, also had the ability, but it never did develop fully in their busy lives. But my son and I shared past lives together, and that was a whole different realm as far as regressions and past lives. After I was really sick in the hospital, coming home, I couldn't take care of myself, so my parents took care of me for 3 months, and my daughter was with my mother-in-law. During that 3 months, I had angels by my side, and every day I could get stronger and stronger. But I had been left with encephalitis, which brought on nightmares as well as my own healing guides, spiritual guides that led me through each night with good dreams, but they were from my childhood all the way up to the present time and to my twins' funeral. I realized that to get my mind straight and heal my body, I had to go back and start over as far as my memory took me at about 3.5 years old. And each night I went to bed, a segment of my life was reviewed, and I had no control over it at all. So going through that process took exactly 3 months, and I was able to go home. And a sidelight to that was just before my sister died, a white stray cat came to my parents' home and was an outside cat, but she only came around when it was feeding time, like morning and evening. And I always thought she was a spirit sent from my sister, because in my illness and recovery, I would sit on the patio every day with her, and she would listen carefully. So I thought, we found out later she was deaf, but she would really soothe my soul and then go off on her own and come back at feeding time. So that went on for 3 months. And the next day after I went home, my mother called me and told me the cat never came back. She didn't come back to eat, and they never saw her again. So I felt that she was put there just for my recovery. And my mother always introduced me as their animal lover because I had strong ties to nature and animals. It wasn't until 1978 I was married and lived in Rockland, California. The train yards where my dad occasionally worked out of Sacramento and in the Roseville area of California were about 5 miles from our residential home. In the night, 3 young girls and 1 boy were killed by a train on the tracks. There was a couple, a girl and the boy in the back seat and 2 girls in the front seat. The crash I heard in my sleep woke me up, and I could never go back to sleep. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning that happened. So I just thought I had a bad dream, but I couldn't sleep any longer. And that was on a Saturday night. And on Sundays, once in a while, my parents would come from another town to visit, and they didn't always call. They would just stop by and ask if we wanted to go somewhere fun with them. When my dad walked in the door, he always read the Sunday paper before they went on their tours or fun times. When he came in the door, he said, "Did you see in the Sacramento Bee this morning about the wreck on the railroad tracks with those 4 young people? How sad." And I said, "Oh, so that's what it was." Now, my dad was very stoic and was an engineer, so he didn't pay much attention when I told him. I said, "That's why I dreamed those people died." So that was how that went. Okay, in 1980 was the next biggest event for me. It was my first UFO sighting with my daughter in Rockland, California. My first UFO sighting was in 1980 with my daughter Janie, 16 years old. It was in the evening of December 1st around 9 p.m. on a pleasantly warm California day. I was driving a 1973 Chevrolet Caprice with the windows partway down. I had just picked up my daughter, Janie, from a nearby city of Roseville. I had to catch the I-80 freeway in Roseville to take the next ramp to Rockland, which was on Taylor Road, to go home. As we were coming down the off-ramp, Janie said, "Mom, what is that bright light way up there?" It was shining like the brightest star in the sky and at an unmeasurable distance. I told her, "Oh, it's probably just an airplane." But at that split second, as though it could hear us, that bright light zapped itself in front of us and just above us. There was no sound whatsoever. It was a large hovering ball of blinding white light. Although it was elliptical, and the bright light, though, was so intense that it was blinding me, so I just looked at the edge of the road and not directly up through the windshield of it so I could drive home safely. My daughter immediately hit the front floorboard, terrified and hysterically whimpering. I continued to drive forward, focusing on the side of the road while trying to calm Janie down to get home safely. The orb was able to keep its position, in other words, travel backwards while I was driving about 40 miles an hour. Then it shot a beam of light that projected from the orb into the front windshield. It began scanning my body vertically from my abdomen to my, then horizontally from shoulder to shoulder at chest level. I have to say, I honestly knew some intelligent, whoever or whatever, curiously wanted to see inside my body. I could feel a strong presence telepathically. I knew they weren't of our kind, and I didn't know anything about aliens at that time. I didn't feel scared, but intrigued and excited by the strong connection, yet the unknown still caused me some pause. The beam of light was withdrawn, and I could no longer see the orb. So I asked my daughter to please look out the back window and see if it is still there. She did so and cried out, "It's in back of us, Mother." It had hovered above the car traveling with us unseen just seconds before. It trailed us a few seconds more and then made a left sweep to my side of the car. There it paused for a few seconds and zapped off as quickly as it zapped in, never to be seen again. We made it home in a few minutes, and I couldn't wait to tell my husband what we had seen. I would say he didn't believe or disbelieve us and showed little concern. I called the local sheriff's department and asked if there were any military aircraft in the area that made no sound. Well, the dispatcher laughed at me and said, "Are you sure it wasn't a helicopter?" I said, "Well, with no sound, I don't think so." And so that was the end of our conversation. After that experience, I knew that whoever was observing us wanted to know about our bodies and how they were made. Much later, I also felt it was like they had empathy for my daughter's extreme fear, as I knew probably they could have shut down my car and maybe abducted us on the quiet stretch of highway. So that was the first UFO incident. And when we got home, my son was only 6 years old, and he really wanted to see his own UFO experience. So, that would be my part 2 of UFOs. It is now 1984, and my son Adam was 10 years old, and I will have a very special UFO experience It was evening and dark outside. We had just left my parents' home in a residential area of Carmichael, California, a suburb of Sacramento, toward a main two-lane street. Adam looked out the passenger side of the car and said, "Mom, what are those lights over there?" I said, "I don't know." I slowed down to see a vertical string of lights to our right, a short distance away, that looked like a radio or television station tower. I was thinking, how could that be? I knew there were no such towers in that area behind my parents' home. Perplexed, I continued to drive to the main street ahead, turning right, still seeing the string of lights. After a few blocks, I pulled over in the parking lot of a Wells Fargo bank. We sat there, and the little bright orbs put on a light show right above and in front of us. Each light separated from the rest, making formations like a choreographed show. They were almost playful, pairing up, moving in circles and other patterns, then joining up again. That went on for about 5 to 10 minutes, then they suddenly just vanished. The display had seemed very childlike, as I said, and as though the lights had been performing for my son. You see, when he was 6 years old, that's what he had told me. He wanted to see a UFO just like his sister and I had seen in 1980. The feeling I got once again was that whoever was out there had compassion and understanding, being able telepathically to know what we were thinking and feeling. My son's wish had come true, and he was over the moon, excited and happy. Now, the most profound next UFO experience happened it is now in 1985 in Carmichael, California, and the following story will be the highlight of my UFO experiences. During the last few years, I had heightened my meditative and psychic abilities, allowing me to do spiritual readings for people. I had reached my superconsciousness and was able to access the universal consciousness or Akashic records. I sometimes read for my friends and for my daughter, Janie. She was not far away attending college and asked to come home for a reading. We set the date and time and met, sharing small talk while we got comfortable on the couch. I quieted myself and began to read for her. My visions and conversation were the usual happenings and incidental things for the first 5 minutes or so. Then, as I sunk deeper into my meditation, I was suddenly interrupted by aliens telepathically with a message they had for me. I told my daughter, "Oh my gosh, the aliens are coming through trying to communicate a message to me." My television had still been on in the corner of the room, although the volume was low. To avoid any interference, I asked my daughter to get up and turn off the TV, which she did. As she was standing there, I noticed on the upper left of the screen, halfway between the center and that left-hand corner, were a sphere of pixelated colors. It reminded me of the old TVs from years ago that would show something similar in the center of the TV screen. It shut off and take time to dissipate. She looked at the screen, wondering why the ball of color was there. Then, with a frantic, anguished look, she said, "Do you see what I see?" So I got up to take a look, and this is what I saw. Inside the sphere, like it was a see-through glass around, were three aliens sitting on small benches. There was one in the front seat or to the right and two in the back seat sitting next to each other. The one in the front would turn to the back using his hands like doing sign language. His fingers were long and skinny, and he only had 4 fingers. He seemed to be able to use his, what we call the first finger, as we use an opposable thumb. They reminded me of fetuses with large heads and no hair, and they had very big black eyes. Two small holes as for breathing, but no bridge for a nose. Their mouths were a mere slit that they opened and closed in a rhythmic fashion. I didn't see any ears or holes in the sides of their head. I could see their chest pulsating like they had a heart beating, but had no sign of internal organs. They were almost like translucent. I was beyond thrilled and wanted to hear what their message was, but my daughter, being so scared, she wanted to turn the TV on to block them out, and I wanted to turn it off so I could see them. So this went back and forth 5 or 6 times. Finally, I convinced her how important it was to see what they had to say. She did stay a while longer, but she was afraid if she left in her car, she would be abducted. Earlier, she was convinced the aliens would have landed in my backyard and taken both of us. Well, neither event happened, and she left my house around 10 p.m., making it home safely. Unfortunately, I had no camera at the time, or maybe, as I remember, a Polaroid camera, but no film. The local stores were all closed to buy a disposable one because this was in the 80s. The aliens did stay on the TV screen for several hours until I went to bed around midnight. I again tried to learn what they had to say while meditating, and their sole message was, "We are of your higher self." And I got the feeling that they were very friendly and still very respectful of my daughter's fears. And they weren't there to do any harm. There was nothing further but my own interpretation of that direct message. And to this day, though, I know exactly what it means, a whole lot more than just a few words. I was sure there would have been more to learn from them, but it never occurred again. I did think if electronic voice phenomena is possible to hear spirits communicate on a recorder, why not aliens making contact on a television? An afterthought was from my friend who is an investigator for MUFON, the National Organization of UFO Experiences, brought to my attention that probably the rhythmic motion of the aliens' mouths was their form of breathing, likening that of fish gills in the water. That would make sense to me if they were modifying their breathing to our atmosphere. Back a few years in 1982, how I learned to read and expand my abilities was by happenstance. I met a lady by the name of Darlene. She was a medium and a reader herself. But through a friend who introduced her to me, she decided that she would do a reading for me, as we were a group of people who would go country western dancing, and afterwards go to a local country cafe and have an early breakfast. So anyway, she taught me psychometry, which is the feelings you get through telepathy of the energy of who the belonging belongs to. And she also taught me about the Akashic records. That is the memory of all things that have happened on Earth, events. See, how can I explain that? It's like a universal consciousness that records everything that's ever been said, thought, actions, events, and so forth. And she had pictures of spirits and how to rid poltergeists. They are friendly ones. So I traveled around with her, and she taught me to read. Psychometry is how I started. And then she took me to people's homes that I'd never met before. And kind of oddly, the only way I could read was to lie down on their couch and put my feet up on the back of the couch. That went on for a year. And suddenly I was able to sit up and read, and then I could be standing, sitting, or in any position to be able to read for the person. So that's how I learned to be in touch with other people as telepathy. Um, And the next event or actually before the last UFO event in 1984, my daughter came home and we were going to take a trip from Sacramento to Nevada City, which is an old gold mining and silver mining town from the 1800s, and just have a fun day. But I did a reading for her that night, and we didn't really intend to test past, present, and future, because as I know today, and for many years, that they are simultaneously happening. But we didn't set out to test them, but that's exactly what happened. So we knew from the reading that what these three events would be simultaneously. So we went to the city and we're shopping in the touristy area downtown. And we decided to go into a store, but I'll back up a minute. The first part in the reading I saw were like taxidermy animals, leopards and tigers and other animals of the wild. But what I thought was my daughter was so in tune with her boyfriend that sometimes his energy would bleed over into my readings with her. And he was going to Chico State at the time, and I thought this must be their science building where they have animals that have been presented in taxidermy. So we passed that off. Well, as we're walking down the street, we stopped at a shop that was relatively new. They hadn't even put all their inventory inside yet. But in the display window were all these miniature taxidermy looking wild animals. And I thought that was really cool because we were wondering what that was. And here we had seen the present. So we had seen the present the night before. So we went into the shop, and my second vision had been in the reading the cashier's, not a desk, but a counter that was fairly small, but hanging over it, draped over, was a simulated or fake hide of a bear. And we looked up and we saw what I had talked about the night before and said, oh, wow, there's a second one. So my daughter at this time is getting anxious. She doesn't believe in the paranormal, but it happened just without my asking. So we kind of dismissed that. But then we crossed the street at random and it was getting near lunchtime. So we saw this little Italian place and they had some American food. And in my reading, I had seen that we were eating hamburgers. And I saw a green and white checkered tablecloth on the table, which normally they're red and white. But anyway, the Italian restaurant having the American food, we sat down and we ordered our food. And I'm laughing because we didn't pay attention to the tablecloth until we were in the middle of eating. And my daughter got this fearful look on her face and she said, can you see? The tablecloth is green and white. And I was never, ever afraid. I wasn't afraid of the UFOs. I wasn't ever afraid of anything. So I got kind of a kick out of it because I didn't understand why it was so scary to her. But anyway, that happened. So we knew that past, present, and future all came together, and it is possible to see your future. In fact, there were times when I would read my own car keys as psychometry without knowing what was coming forth. And they were probably some of my desires or wants, but I wasn't sure if they were ever going to happen, but they did. So then this is another profound thing that happened to me in 1986. It was Christmas time, And I was sitting in the living room wrapping presents a week or two before Christmas. My son was probably a preteen at that time, and he'd had a bad cold and cough. And he had gone to bed early after having, taken some cough syrup. And so I wasn't sure if he was completely asleep or not, but I'm sitting there at the table. I was wrapping presents. And all of a sudden, in back into my right ear, a whisper says my name. And I thought, oh, how cool is that? And so it said it again. And I thought, well, maybe my twin, having been gone for many years, maybe she's back because it's the holidays and she just wants me to know she's there. So I didn't know who it was. So I just kind of giggled and went on with what I was doing. But it was about 11 o'clock. And I thought, I better wind this up. So I gathered up trash and tidbits of things that had fallen on the floor. Anyway, I went out to my dumpster and was dumping it. And I lived in a smaller house, and there was a bigger house next, and it had been owned by a family, and I was in like the mother-in-law's house. But the driveway was semicircular and went out to a side street as well as the main street. And as I was leaving the trash can, I looked up, and here is a man walking from the side street towards me. And at first I thought it was my neighbor because they walked their dog before they went to bed and they didn't have a fenced yard like I did. But anyway, he was walking towards me in full form. He had a fedora hat on. So it was like kind of like you would think of someone back in the 40s or 50s. And my dad used to wear a fedora hat to and from work. So anyway, he's walking towards me, and then I'm getting a little uneasy because I don't see a dog with him, so I don't know who it is. So I went in the house, and I'm looking out the window, and as he walks toward my door, he just vanishes in thin air. Well, I knew what time it was because I had been thinking about I need to get to bed because I worked the next day. That was on a Wednesday night, and my mother called me on Friday and told me that my Uncle Maynard had had several heart attacks, he was still alive, and they'd brought him back several times. But she didn't know what time that had occurred the night before. So she said, would you like to go with us? She had other sisters and herself to visit him in the hospital and on Saturday. So I went with them, and the family was in the main lobby, and they were deciding who was going to go up first. And my aunt, who was the leader of the my mother had 5 sisters and 4 brothers. So aunts and uncles, she was kind of a leader. And she said, well, Margie, since Janice is with you, why don't you go on up? So we went up. And here's what I didn't mention when that whispers were in my ear. This is very important. So I'll go back a little bit. My son had a fish aquarium in the living room, and he had just cleaned it that day. But when that whisper called my name, I heard this gurgling sound and whooshing sound. And I thought, oh gosh, I knew my son had just cleaned the fish aquarium. Is that coming from the aquarium? And I walked over to check it out, and it seemed to be working okay. So, and then I went in to check and see if it was him making some odd noises, and he was sound asleep. So that's why I knew those sounds were related to the whisper. So anyway, as we met in the lobby of the hospital, my aunt had decided that my mother and I would go up first. And I walked into my uncle's room, and he was on a respirator and had a tracheotomy and all the other bells and whistles. And I knew immediately that was his spirit calling me at my home because the sound was identical to what I had heard. But the purpose of that, I found out later, was where I worked. He had been in one hospital and he was in hospice. They had transferred him to another hospital or facility that was only 2 blocks from my work. So every night after work, I went to visit him and sit by him, by his bed, and just talk to him. And it was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. In that room, the only thing on the wall was a huge calendar, and they'd mark off the date each day that passed. And that's all he had to look at. And he had a great sense of humor. I said, I don't blame you for being frustrated with all these things going on, all these mechanisms and machines hooked up to you. And he chuckled, but he couldn't speak. So I did that until he passed for a few weeks. So then I knew what the purpose of it was. If you have any questions, you could ask me or interrupt me.
Absolutely. So the way that you have been aware of and communicating with things, do you think it is also possible to communicate with Bigfoot that way as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell you, Jeremiah, there's no question in my mind that it was him. Do you want me to expand on that right now?
Yeah.
Because, okay, that's great. Even my close friend who investigates UFOs and alien stories, this is normal. I do it myself. I fact find and try to prove that it's not something different from what I believe it is. You know, you just test yourself. But she even tried to fact find me in every way, and I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, I kept a journal of this, and I can go to that right now because I have so many other things, you know, that are paranormal. But I just want to tell you my organization was Spirit Manifestations and the Essences, Dreams, Paranormal, Metaphysical Happenings, UFO Experiences, Regressions, Readings, and Bigfoot. So anyway, this was July 29th last year. I recorded or wrote down uncanny incident and audio communication vocalization from an owl. I had watched a documentary on YouTube of Bigfoot and Dogman encounters from the Sasquatch theory. Experiencers said he was introduced to Bigfoot family by a woman who had formed a friendship. After meeting them and ending their conversation, the Big Daddy let out 2 huge barn owl hoots and a low guttural growl. That evening, I fell asleep on the couch for about 9:45 to 11 or so. I don't remember exactly. My kitchen window was open. It was fairly warm but comfortable. And after I brushed my teeth, went potty, took my dog outside, I heard a small barn owl just outside my kitchen window. The interesting part was I've never had any owls here, and I kind of grew up with hearing barn owls and some barred owls. So anyway, I walked into the kitchen and I heard a barn owl right outside the window, audibly. And there were 3 to 4 soft, gentle hoots with 2 hoots each. So there were increments of 3 hoots with 2 hoots each, followed by a deep growl sound or guttural sound that I could not identify, but sounded like kind of like a dog and maybe even a bit of a seal. And I've had my ear to the screen, and then it kind of trailed off with a whimper. And I thought, I thought maybe a rodent is below the window. I don't know what this is. I couldn't believe it. I wrote, Bigfoot must have sent me a confirmation of their existence, whether by telepathy or clairaudience or not. I had put my ear close to the screen after the first hoot hoot, and I've never had a barn owl here since I moved here 8 years ago, only indigenous birds, especially neighborhood crows. This experience stayed with me for days and nights when I went to bed. But early the next morning, which was really 2 a.m., I hear a group of people chatting outside my window in the bedroom. Woke me up. Now, I know I have a side street that's on the same side of the house as my bedroom, away from the main street. And I know every car or visiting car that is there. And actually, there were no visitors and there was nobody out there because I'm up on a rise and I can walk in the kitchen and look down and see. There was nobody outside. There weren't even any lights on. Some people don't even turn on their porch light. So I thought, that's odd. Where is it coming from? But I couldn't understand what they were saying. So that really made me take notice. So I tried my best to go back to sleep, which I just started to doze off. It was 4 a.m. And a sound that shook me till I almost fell out of bed. I mean, it startled me because I was already on edge in my sleep. It was like the old-fashioned metal garbage cans and somebody took a baseball bat and just hit it as hard as they could. Now, none of this has ever happened since, and it never happened before. So I thought, now this is the third characteristic of Bigfoot. So I think I have fallen into his channel. And it was just, I actually was really shaken by it because I wouldn't mind seeing one from a distance, but I certainly didn't want one in the privacy of my own home. So I didn't get much sleep that night at all. It was like remote hearing. Had I been tagged by this powerful and telepathic intelligent beast? This too was discussed by experiencers. I later found out that I hadn't known some of these characteristics. And this was that day or the night before in the early morning, and then this was in the evening. I really usually relax between 8 and 9 in the living room, and I just kind of close my eyes and lean back and relax. And a black shadow cut out the ambient light that was in the room. Like I have twinkle lights over the fireplace, and I have a light on in the kitchen that goes through the living room. And it was very quick. So I thought, yeah, there's movement here for sure. So it was 2 days later on Wednesday is my garbage collection day. So I was rolling my dumpster out to the street. Now my driveway isn't real long, but it comes downward to my house. And I always put my dumpster right near the street on the edge of the driveway on the right side, or if I'm looking at my house, it's the left. But anyway, right there where I park it is a rock. Now I have some river rock on the side of my house, but not near the street. And I thought, then I had heard about Bigfoot placing rocks by your house. And then I tried to convince myself, well, a lot of kids walk up and down because a school bus stops at the end of the street. Maybe they just picked it up somewhere and put it there. So I kind of let that go. Well, it was just this last weekend. Now, that same rock ended up just inches away from that same spot on the dirt around shrubs in my front yard. And the reason I know it was, because when I picked it up before, the first time, I had tossed it back on the side of the house where the rocks were. And I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. But then I had a recall. It kind of looked like a heart with an appendage off to the right of it. So I thought, now this, I can't really, I can't really excuse. I think they reach out. But I know for sure, I gave a good analogy because I kind of communicate with AI on my phone.
Okay.
That the analogy is, if you were in the mountains and you didn't have any cell power or connections, and you came down out of the mountains and you picked up energy or connection with the towers and could use your phone again, that's kind of like what happens when my telepathy is in that frequency. It hits on their channel. This is how I think of it. And I've been told, I told you I talked to two experiencers that grew up with Bigfoot. Let's see, I have to, Robin Haynes on your show.
Yep.
And Shakara Tosha.
Correct.
They both told me, this was good, is that my vibrational frequencies is high enough that Bigfoot selects people who are vulnerable. And they also like to protect single women because I live alone. And I thought, scaring me, how does that protect me?
That's interesting. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I go, you're not protecting me when you're scaring me. Because I've always been.
Maybe you need to tell them that, hey, you're scaring me. Maybe they just don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
No, absolutely, Jeremiah. I've had talks with them, and it helped for sure. Because Robin said, tell them you don't go to their camp, so please don't come to my home, and show them love and respect. So I tell them I love them, and that I'm happy that they've connected, but I just don't wish to have you in my home. But here's the big kicker. My dog is as telepathic as I am. And he started noticing, well, I'm going to have to back up just a bit. A year ago at Christmas, I started seeing shadows in my peripheral, in my living room. And that's never bothered me before. I've had living people have their spirits visit me when they're in trouble or ill or whatever, as well as the deceased. But I looked over to my right, which is my lounge chair, only a few feet from the couch, and I was sitting on the couch, and I see a full-formed manifestation, a woman, full form, and I didn't really recognize her, but her mannerisms were just like my mother. And she stayed a few minutes, but she leaned over like she was putting something in the chair and picking it back up. And that my mother was always dilly-dallying, fiddle-faddling around when I'm sitting there visiting with her. She couldn't sit still very long. So I assumed that was my mother. And then the next day after that, my dog is laying next to me on my left side on the couch, and I'm watching TV. Oh, the woman just vanished as she walked into the kitchen. But my dog was laying next to me, and I'm enthralled in a program on TV, and I see smoke coming out from in front of his body. I mean, white tendrils of smoke. Well, I knew he wasn't on fire. I have to laugh about this. And I look down, and there's a foggy mass spooning with him like another animal, but it's not defined. It's just a mass covering his underbelly up to his front legs, just like a little animal. And that's where my other dog used to lay that died a few years ago. But that kind of took me aback because I don't want weird things happening. So I looked it up on the, is it GPT or the AI app?
Yep,
And it
that's
was
one of them.
quite
Yep.
detailed. Yeah, it was white detailed. Exactly. It explained it exactly what I saw, the white tendrils of smoke. And it said it's a spirit that doesn't have enough energy or frequency to manifest fully. It was very descriptive, exactly. Well, those two things never happened again. But when I had the communication or telepathy with Bigfoot, what started to happen was my dog would stare at the entry coat closet just, probably 15 feet away from where I was sitting. He would stare like he was mesmerized and in a trance. He could do that for 5 to 10 minutes. Then his head would jerk at some movement, but I'm not seeing anything. I'm not seeing any shadows, no manifestations, nothing. But he's looking at it, and at first he would growl. And then he'd watch it walk around the room, and he'd look up and he'd look down, and he'd look around, and then his head would move slowly or fast, and almost like he was watching an insect or fly or something, but there were no bugs in the house or insects. So anyway, what really convinced me that it was spirit, the carpet ends right by the entry where the coat closet is, but it's wooden flooring there in the entry. Well, he finally got up the gumption to go over, and he laid down on the edge of the carpet, and he looks straight up, and he sniffs. So he finally feels secure enough. He gets up, and he walks in a small circle on that wooden floor, like he's sniffing a newcomer that's coming in to greet them by sniffing their pant legs. Went completely 360 around sniffing. And I just always tell him, it's okay, they won't hurt you, because he knows what that means. And so then I was convinced they're just not showing themselves, but they're here. Like if it wasn't for my dog, I wouldn't even have known unless they contacted me telepathically. Well, they're still here. And that was back in November. We have them every day, anytime during the day. It can be morning, it can be noon, afternoon, but it's a dead sure thing. If I'm sitting, he's on his bed on the couch right now, but if I'm sitting next to him, they come every night at 7, between 7 and 8 or 9, like right now. But he's not excited, and I think it's more a protection thing. because now he does, every now and then when it gets real active, he growls. And he used to have a bark at times, but he's convinced they're not going to hurt him. But they never left. But like the others I've seen in my life were there and then they never came back. Was kind of assuming at first it might be my mother again because it happened during the holiday season.
Mm.
And my dad is the one who manifested after he died. And that's another story. But yeah, I don't know who it is.
We mentioned that you live in Washington, and we don't have to give we don't have to get into super specifics, but I'm just curious, the area that you are located in, is it known for a lot of like Bigfoot activity and Bigfoot sightings?
Well, I don't know about currently, but I did look it up for well, I know the county. I looked it up and it said this area is known for Bigfoot activity.
Mm.
And I have to say, I love going to museums when I'm new in an area. But I think it was about 5 years ago. There's a nice little museum, and it had a full out display of Bigfoot. It had footprint castings and the area mapped out, but I wasn't into any of that then. I enjoyed looking at it, but I didn't keep, or I think I took pictures, but my last phone died and I lost files and pictures. But yeah, it was something because, well, Washington State, in the Cascade Mountains and farther north is really a hot area. But here, I didn't know this county I live in has had quite a bit of history of sightings. And we do have quite a few nice rivers, and we're not too far from the outlets from the inlets or bays from the ocean.
Gotcha. Yeah.
There's a lot of waterways and a lot of beautiful, we're the evergreen state.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That area out there, I mean, definitely has a lot of things going all the time. So you mentioned that you experience these shadows the same time every night?
Yes, but I don't see the shadows. It's my dog.
Right.
Sometimes Jeremiah, I felt bad for him. He's the most loving little dog, and I rescued him from Mexico 5 years ago. And he's just so loving, and he's so in tune to me. I've had 31 dogs in my life. And some, it's like people, IQs are higher than others, but some dogs have actually been telepathically connected to me and they can read my mind and I could read theirs. Well, he's like that. But it was because of him. And it's just, I have a couple of videos, about 5 videos I took of him watching them. And I tried to send it to a friend, and I don't know if I've tried reducing it, but she couldn't receive them. So I don't know. She thought maybe it was because it was a paranormal experience. But yeah, they just stayed. And actually, before I moved here in 2016, and I had no activity. And it started in 2023 Christmas season. And my mother just loved and never could get enough of Christmas. So I assumed this was her, but then whoever it is didn't leave. But what I've been thinking about doing, I know in Seattle, First of all, I didn't want to spend any extravagant amount of money to have an investigator come here and not tell them anything about it, but see what they pick up with their equipment. And there's several near Seattle that do it free of charge just for their own studies and investigations. And then my other thought about that was, what if that invites other malevolent and not benevolent spirit? Because this one does no harm. You know, things are not flying around my house or weird stuff. They're just there. Maybe I should just leave well enough alone. But the thing that kind of, I won't say I'm totally, I don't care so much about it, but I feel bad for my dog because it really, it concerns him. He shouldn't have to be on alert every day. But it usually happens when I'm sitting next to him. To see, as long as I've been talking to you, he's been resting on the couch, sleeping, and he's not looking around the room at all.
So right now he's okay. No issues. That's good.
Yeah, he didn't do it tonight. He does it every night. But he didn't do it at all, and I can see him from where I'm sitting by my computer in the kitchen.
Maybe some listeners could come up with an idea of some way to help your dog. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I haven't experienced that before.
Well, Janice, you're definitely in an interesting situation. It feels like you're kind of in the area where there might be like stuff might start to change. And I'm not, I don't know if it's gonna stay the same way it is where it is right now forever. I don't know.
I've read that. In fact, I'm reading the book. It actually is about a 20-year-old book of We the Arcturian. Those are star people from Arcturus. And that was what, see, I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was Robin Haynes who told me that my frequency of vibrational frequency is high, and it tunes me into things. But I'm an ordinary, hardworking. I was a single parent for many years, and have grandchildren that come visit. Nothing ever happens, and the grandkids, of course, they don't know. But yeah, I'm just an ordinary person that I think of myself. But my son calls me, not on a regular basis, but describes me as paranormal.
That's funny. Paranormal mom. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have heard and read about spirit that normally they lose interest and leave. And I don't think about it all the time, but I would say you've had your stint. Now it's time for you to go. But they do talk about it. Some shows I've watched and that they will leave. Normally they're not permanent. Like some people have them for a month or two, but I think 4 months is enough.
Yeah, I think eventually you get to the point where you're like, all right, it's time for you to go. maybe not just wait for them to go by themselves. But yeah, Janice, it's been fun talking to you. Thank you for hanging out tonight. I hope your dog continues to get some rest, and hopefully you can figure out what's going on there.
He's resting. That dog sleeps about 12 hours. He's so easy. Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad we connected. I just love watching your podcast, but for a while I didn't watch them because I felt I was zoning in too much.
Right.
Just by seeing and hearing, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll be watching your shows still.
Well, Janice, I would say, I mean, keep me up to date with if things start to change, and if you think you start to have more contact with, Bigfoot on your property. It would be interesting to hear, 'cause sometimes what can happen is it can amp up out of nowhere, but it's, I mean, you have a very interesting story. It's been fun chatting with you tonight, but I think definitely keep me in touch with if things continue to change in the future. You have a great rest of your night, and thank you again.
You too. Bye-bye.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKinsey Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.